The captain of the fishing trawler spotted the drifting motorboat just after dawn, approximately 50 miles off the Qatari coast. His crew pulled alongside to find 2 women aboard. One, later identified as a Brazilian national, had already succumbed to massive blood loss from what forensic experts would determine was a hunting arrow wound. The other woman, barely conscious and severely dehydrated, was a 26-year-old Colombian citizen named Valentina Restrepo. The discovery, logged by the Qatari Coast Guard at 6:43 in the morning, initiated an investigation that authorities would later attempt to bury without public scrutiny. To understand how these women ended up adrift in the Persian Gulf requires reconstructing the events that began 3 days earlier. Valentina had arrived in Doha 18 months prior on a domestic worker visa, sponsored by a cleaning agency called Pearl Services. Her salary of $570 per month represented standard compensation for her position, yet for Valentina, every dollar carried weight she could measure in concrete terms. Back in Cali, her younger brother required daily medication for a chronic respiratory condition. Her mother, who cared for him, had been forced to quit her factory job. Valentina sent home nearly her entire paycheck, keeping only enough to cover her shared dormitory room and basic necessities. Her daily routine followed an unvarying pattern. She worked in the homes of wealthy Qatari families, mostly in the diplomatic district of West Bay, cleaning, cooking, and occasionally caring for children. The work was exhausting but unremarkable. She slept in a cramped room with 3 other Colombian women, all employed by the same agency. On Friday afternoons, her one day off, she would video call her family using the shared computer in the dormitory's common area. Her agency supervisor, a Lebanese woman named Rania Khaled, described Valentina as efficient, punctual, and notably discreet. These qualities, it seemed, had drawn someone's attention. On a Wednesday morning in March, Rania summoned Valentina to the agency office, located in a converted villa near the industrial area. The meeting was unusual. Rania typically communicated assignments via group text messages. Valentina arrived to find Rania seated behind her desk with an expression that suggested both opportunity and caution. She gestured for Valentina to sit, then slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. The document outlined what Rania called a special assignment. A private client, whose name would not be disclosed for security reasons, required domestic assistance for a 3-day period. The location was described only as a private residence requiring helicopter transport. The nature of the work remained vague, listed as event preparation and guest services. What stood out, printed in bold text at the bottom of the page, was the compensation figure of $4,800. Valentina read the number 3 times. The amount represented nearly 8 months of her regular salary. With that money, her brother could afford the newer medication his doctor had recommended. Her mother could stop worrying about the overdue rent. Valentina looked up at Rania, who was watching her carefully. The supervisor explained that the assignment required absolute confidentiality. No communication would be possible during the 3 days. The client insisted on discretion above all else. Valentina would need to sign a non-disclosure agreement before receiving any additional details. The decision should have required more consideration. Valentina had heard stories from other domestic workers about private assignments that turned exploitative. Women disappeared into wealthy households and emerged weeks later with horror stories of unpaid labor, sexual harassment, or physical abuse. Yet sitting in that office, calculating her brother's medication costs against her mother's exhausted face during their last video call, Valentina found herself nodding. She asked only 2 questions. When would she leave, and when would she return? Rania answered that departure was scheduled for the following morning, with guaranteed return within 72 hours. The non-disclosure agreement was printed in English, a language Valentina understood poorly despite 18 months in Qatar. Rania translated selected portions, emphasizing the confidentiality clause and the penalty for breach of contract. Valentina signed 3 copies. Rania kept 2 and handed her the 3rd, which Valentina folded and tucked into her purse. As she stood to leave, Rania added one final instruction. Pack light, only essential toiletries. Everything else would be provided. Valentina nodded and left, her mind already calculating how to explain her 3-day absence to her roommates without violating the confidentiality agreement she had just signed. That evening, Valentina lay in her narrow dormitory bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. Her roommate, a woman from Medellin named Paula, asked where she would be working for the next few days. Valentina offered the rehearsed answer Rania had suggested. A wealthy family in Al Rayyan needed help preparing for a large wedding reception. Paula, too tired from her own 12-hour shift to probe further, simply wished her luck and rolled over to sleep. Valentina remained awake long after the lights went out, torn between anticipation and a creeping unease she could not articulate. The following morning, a black SUV with tinted windows arrived at the dormitory at precisely 5:30. The driver, a Pakistani man who did not offer his name, loaded Valentina's small backpack into the trunk without speaking. She climbed into the back seat to find she was not alone. 3 other women sat in silence, each appearing to be in their 20s or early 30s. One looked Southeast Asian, possibly Filipino. Another appeared to be from East Africa, perhaps Kenyan. The third woman had the features and complexion suggesting Brazilian or possibly Peruvian origin. None of them made eye contact or attempted conversation. The drive lasted 40 minutes, heading away from central Doha toward the outskirts where private airfields served Qatar's wealthy elite. They passed through multiple security checkpoints, each guard waving them through after a brief glance at the driver's credentials. Finally, they arrived at a small aviation facility consisting of 2 hangars and a single helipad. A helicopter waited with its rotors already spinning, the noise making conversation impossible even if anyone had been inclined to speak. A man in his 50s, dressed in pressed khaki pants and a white polo shirt, approached as they exited the SUV. He had the efficient manner of someone accustomed to managing logistics. He collected their passports and mobile phones, explaining in accented English that this was standard security protocol for private property access. The items would be returned upon their departure. When Valentina hesitated, reluctant to surrender her only means of communication, the man added that the client's estate had no cellular coverage regardless. Keeping the phone would serve no purpose. They boarded the helicopter in silence. Valentina had never flown in anything smaller than a commercial airliner. The aircraft felt unnervingly fragile as it lifted off, banking sharply over the desert landscape before turning northeast toward the coast. Through the window, Valentina watched the city of Doha shrink and disappear. The coastline appeared, then vanished as they continued over open water. The flight lasted roughly 90 minutes. Valentina tried to track their direction by the sun's position, but her sense of geography failed her. All she could determine with certainty was that they were far from land, flying over an unbroken expanse of blue water. The island appeared suddenly, a small green circle in the vast blue. As they descended, Valentina could make out details. Dense vegetation covered most of the landmass, broken only by a strip of white beach and a modern villa constructed primarily of glass and steel. The helicopter touched down on a concrete pad near the shore. The man who had collected their documents, apparently the estate manager, was waiting as they disembarked. He introduced himself as Hassan and explained that Prince Khalid, the property owner, would arrive the following day. Today was designated for rest and orientation. Hassan led them along a stone path to a smaller building adjacent to the main villa. He called it the guest house, though it resembled a luxury hotel suite more than temporary worker quarters. The interior featured marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Persian Gulf, and 4 separate bedrooms, each with its own bathroom. Hassan outlined the rules in his precise, unemotional English. They were not to leave the guest house without escort. The main villa was strictly off-limits. The beach and immediate grounds could be accessed during daylight hours only. Meals would be delivered 3 times daily. After Hassan departed, locking the main door from outside, the 4 women finally began to speak in whispers. The Filipino woman, who introduced herself as Maria, admitted she had been recruited through her agency in Dubai under similar vague circumstances. The Kenyan woman, named Amara, had come from a household staff agency in Kuwait. The Brazilian, whose name was Isabella, worked for a hospitality company in Manama. Each had been offered extraordinary compensation for 3 days of unspecified work. Each had signed extensive non-disclosure agreements. Each was now locked in a luxury prison on an island they could not locate on any map. Valentina explored her assigned bedroom. The space was immaculately appointed with expensive linens and designer furniture. The closet contained a bathrobe and slippers in her exact size. Hanging beside them was a complete outfit, dark grey athletic wear and brand new running shoes that fit her perfectly when she tried them on. She found identical clothing in the other bedrooms. Someone had prepared these items specifically for them, knowing their sizes in advance. The realization sent a chill through Valentina that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Dinner arrived at 7 that evening, delivered by 2 staff members who refused to make eye contact. The meal was elaborate: grilled hammerfish, saffron rice, and roasted vegetables, served on fine china. The women ate in near silence, the tension between them thick enough to taste. Afterward, Valentina stood at the window watching darkness swallow the ocean. Behind her, Isabella attempted conversation, asking if anyone knew exactly where they were. Nobody did. Maria estimated they had flown northeast based on the sun, perhaps toward Iranian waters, but admitted she was only guessing. Exhaustion eventually drove them to their separate rooms. Valentina lay awake for hours, her mind cycling through possibilities. Perhaps they truly were here to prepare for some extravagant party. Perhaps the paranoia was unfounded, yet the locked doors, confiscated phones, and athletic clothing in the closets suggested something else entirely. She finally drifted into uneasy sleep sometime after midnight. The gunshots shattered the silence at 3:14 in the morning. Valentina bolted upright, her heart hammering. The shots came in rapid succession, automatic weapons fire that seemed to originate just outside the guest house. Before she could process what was happening, her bedroom door burst open. 3 men in tactical masks rushed inside, assault rifles pointed at her. They shouted no words, communicated only through aggressive gestures. One pointed at the athletic clothing in her closet, then at her, the meaning unmistakable. Valentina's hands shook as she changed, her mind unable to grasp what was occurring. The men watched her without expression, their faces hidden behind black balaclavas. Once dressed, her wrists were yanked behind her back and secured with plastic zip ties that bit into her skin. She was shoved into the hallway where the other 3 women stood in identical grey athletic wear, hands bound, faces pale with terror. Amara was crying silently, tears streaming down her cheeks. Nobody spoke. They were marched outside into humid darkness. The path led away from the guest house, deeper into the island's interior, where dense vegetation swallowed the moonlight. Valentina stumbled over roots and rocks, unable to use her hands for balance. The walk lasted perhaps 20 minutes before they emerged into a clearing. Powerful floodlights powered by a generator illuminated the space with harsh white light that made Valentina squint. In the center stood a man. Prince Khalid bin Ahmed Al Thani was 44 years old, though he maintained the physique of someone younger through obvious dedication to fitness. He wore expensive camouflage gear, the kind marketed to wealthy safari hunters. In his hands, he held a compound hunting bow, modern carbon fiber construction with precision sights. A large hunting knife hung from his belt in a tactical sheath. Hassan, the estate manager who had greeted them at the helipad, stood beside him holding a clipboard. The prince studied the 4 women with an expression Valentina would later describe as clinical detachment, the way a scientist might examine laboratory specimens. He began speaking in Arabic. Hassan translated into English, his tone flat and procedural. The prince welcomed them to what he called a survival experience. He would give them exactly 30 minutes head start. After that, he would begin hunting. Their objective was simple: survive until 6 in the morning. The island was completely surrounded by water. The nearest mainland was 50 miles away. Swimming was not an option. Hassan paused, allowing the words to penetrate. The prince continued speaking. If any of them survived until dawn, she would be declared the winner. The winner would receive $100,000 and immediate release. Hassan did not specify what would happen to those who did not survive. The implication hung in the floodlit air like smoke. Amara made a sound, something between a sob and a gasp. One of the masked guards struck her shoulder with the butt of his rifle, not hard enough to injure, but enough to communicate silence. The prince said something else in Arabic. Hassan stepped forward and cut the zip ties binding their wrists. The plastic fell away, leaving red marks on Valentina's skin. The prince looked at them one final time, then spoke a single word in English. "Run." Valentina ran. Her body moved before her conscious mind could engage, pure survival instinct propelling her legs. She crashed through the undergrowth away from the clearing, branches whipping her face and arms. Behind her, she heard the others scattering in different directions. The floodlights faded behind her as she plunged deeper into darkness. Her years playing football in Cali had given her stamina. She ran hard for what felt like 10 minutes before slowing to a fast walk, her lungs burning. The jungle was thick, nearly impenetrable in places. She pushed through, trying to move quietly, but knowing she was making far too much noise. Her plan, if it could be called that, was to reach the beach. Some instinct told her the coastline offered better chances, though for what she could not articulate. The darkness was absolute beneath the canopy. She navigated by feel, hands extended, moving away from where she believed the villa stood. Time became elastic, impossible to measure. She might have been moving for 20 minutes or 2 hours when she heard the first scream. It came from her left, perhaps half a mile away. The voice was distinctly female, high-pitched with terror, cut off abruptly. Valentina froze, pressing herself against a tree trunk. The scream had belonged to Amara, she was certain. The Kenyan woman had run in that direction. Silence returned, broken only by her own ragged breathing and the distant crash of waves. Valentina forced herself to move again, slower now, placing each foot carefully. The athletic shoes they had been given had good traction, designed for exactly this terrain. Someone had planned this carefully. Every detail had been considered. Perhaps another hour passed. Valentina found herself paralleling the coast, staying within the tree line but keeping the sound of surf within earshot. She was desperately thirsty, her mouth dry with fear and exertion. Then the second scream shattered the night. This one was closer, much closer. Valentina recognized Maria's voice. The scream rose, filled with pain and terror, then dissolved into choking sounds before going silent. 2 down. Only she and Isabella remained. Valentina dropped to the ground, curling into the roots of a massive tree, making herself as small as possible. She lay there for an eternity, counting her heartbeats, waiting for footsteps or voices or the whisper of an arrow in flight. Nothing came. Gradually, her panicked breathing slowed. She had to move, had to find shelter or a weapon or some way to survive the remaining hours until dawn. Valentina remained motionless for what she estimated was another hour, pressed against the tree roots, barely breathing. The humidity made her clothes stick to her skin. Mosquitoes fed on her exposed neck and arms, but she did not dare move to swat them. Every sound became a potential threat, the rustle of leaves, the crack of a branch, the distant call of some nocturnal bird. Her mind kept returning to Maria's final scream, the way it had ended so abruptly. She needed to move. Staying in one place made her vulnerable. If the prince was using night vision equipment, which seemed likely given his resources, remaining stationary only made her easier to find. Valentina pushed herself up slowly, every muscle protesting. She had no idea what time it was, how many hours remained until dawn. The sky showed no hint of lightning. She moved deeper into the island's interior, away from the coast where she assumed the hunter would expect his prey to flee. The vegetation grew thicker. Several times she had to crawl beneath low-hanging branches, her hands sinking into soft earth that smelled of decay. A small stream cut through the jungle, barely a foot wide. Valentina knelt and drank desperately despite not knowing if the water was safe. At this point, dysentery seemed a distant concern. The collision happened without warning. Valentina rounded a massive tree trunk and walked directly into another person. Both women gasped, stumbling backward. Valentina's hand flew up defensively before she recognized Isabella's face in the weak moonlight filtering through the canopy. The Brazilian woman's eyes were wide with terror, her athletic clothes torn and muddy. They stared at each other for a frozen moment. Then Isabella grabbed Valentina's arm. They moved away from the spot quickly, Isabella pulling Valentina deeper into the undergrowth until they found a hollow beneath a fallen tree. They crawled inside, finally allowing themselves to speak in urgent whispers. Isabella was barefoot, having lost her shoes crossing a muddy ravine. Her feet were badly cut. She had heard both screams. She believed they were the only two left alive. Valentina asked if Isabella had seen the hunter. She had not, but she had found something else. About an hour ago, moving through the jungle, she had glimpsed lights through the trees. Not the clearing where this nightmare had begun, but different lights, steady and stationary. The villa. Isabella believed she had circled back toward the main compound without realizing it. She had been moving away from it when she encountered Valentina. They debated their options in whispered fragments. Hiding in the jungle until dawn seemed increasingly futile. The prince clearly knew this terrain intimately. He had night vision equipment, weapons, and all the advantages. They were exhausted, dehydrated, and in Isabella's case, injured. Valentina voiced what they were both thinking. Their only realistic chance was not to hide, but to find help. The villa had communication equipment, satellite phones, radios. If they could reach the main building unseen, if they could send a distress signal, they might survive. Isabella initially rejected the idea as suicide. The villa would have guards, security systems. The prince himself might be there. But as they talked, examining their situation from every angle, the alternatives seemed equally hopeless. Dawn could not be more than 2 or 3 hours away. They had that much time to either wait in the jungle to be hunted down or take desperate action. They decided on desperation. Isabella led the way back toward where she had seen the lights, moving slowly given her injured feet. Valentina followed, every nerve screaming. The journey took over an hour of painstaking movement. Finally, through the thinning vegetation, they saw the villa. Most of the structure was dark, but security lights illuminated the perimeter. The main building sat perhaps 200 yards away, across manicured lawn that offered no cover. They circled the property, staying within the jungle's edge, looking for an approach route. The villa's design was modern, primarily glass walls that currently reflected only darkness. A service entrance near the back appeared less exposed than the main facade. They watched for 20 minutes, looking for guards, cameras, any movement. The building seemed almost abandoned. Valentina checked the luminous dial of a watch she found strapped to her wrist, presumably provided with the athletic clothing. 4:37 in the morning, less than 90 minutes until the 6 o'clock deadline. They were out of time for caution. She looked at Isabella, who nodded. They moved. The crossing felt endless despite lasting perhaps 45 seconds. They ran low and fast across the exposed lawn, expecting shouts or gunfire at any moment. None came. They reached the service entrance, a plain door beside what appeared to be the kitchen area. Valentina tried the handle, expecting it to be locked. It turned. The door opened silently. The kitchen was enormous, all stainless steel and marble counters designed for preparing meals for large gatherings. Dim emergency lighting provided just enough illumination to navigate. They moved through it quickly, Isabella leaving small bloody footprints on the white tile. Beyond the kitchen, a hallway extended toward the villa's main spaces. They followed it, every instinct screaming that this was a trap, that the unlocked door had been intentional, that they were walking exactly where the prince wanted them to go. The hallway opened into the main living area, a vast space with those floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the dark ocean. Moonlight streaming through created confusing shadows. They spotted a door marked with what appeared to be communication symbols, a stylized radio tower. Isabella pointed. Valentina nodded. That had to be the radio room. They crossed the living area, past a bar stocked with expensive liquor, past leather furniture that probably cost more than Valentina would earn in 5 years. The door was unlocked. Inside, banks of electronic equipment lined one wall, sophisticated communication gear. Valentina had taken a basic technology course in Cali before coming to Qatar. She recognized a satellite communication system, The main transmitter had a large red button labeled with international emergency symbols. Isabella stood watch at the door while Valentina approached the console. Her hand hovered over the emergency button. This would alert authorities, Coast Guard, maybe military. If she pressed it, someone would respond. She pushed the button. A green light activated, confirming transmission. For 3 seconds, Valentina allowed herself to hope. Then a speaker in the corner of the room crackled to life. Prince Khalid's voice, speaking calm English, filled the radio room. He congratulated them on reaching the final stage. At that moment, every light in the villa blazed to life simultaneously. The sudden illumination was blinding. Valentina threw her arm across her eyes, pupils contracting painfully from the transition. When her vision cleared, Prince Khalid stood in the doorway behind Isabella. He wore the same camouflage clothing from hours earlier, now slightly damp with perspiration. The compound bow hung ready in his hands, an arrow already nocked. Hassan stood behind him, blocking any escape route through the corridor. The prince spoke in English, his accent carrying the polish of British education. He complimented their resourcefulness, their initiative in attempting to turn the game around. Few participants, he said, had ever made it this far. The word participant struck Valentina with sickening clarity. This was not the first time. There had been others before them, other women hunted on this island. Isabella remained frozen in the doorway, her injured feet leaving small blood pools on the marble floor. The prince raised his bow slowly, almost casually. He was not aiming at Valentina near the radio equipment. His arrow pointed at Isabella, who stood 3 yards away. Isabella saw the movement and began to turn, perhaps to run, perhaps simply to face her death. She managed neither. The bow released with barely a whisper, just the soft snap of the string and the brief whistle of the arrow in flight. The projectile struck Isabella's left thigh, the hunting broadhead punching through muscle and stopping just short of the femoral artery. Isabella's scream was immediate and visceral, pain without filter. She collapsed, both hands clutching at the arrow shaft protruding from her leg. Blood, darker than Valentina expected, began soaking through the grey athletic pants. Something in Valentina broke at that moment. Not broke toward collapse, but broke toward action. The paralysis of fear that had gripped her throughout this nightmare shattered. She was no longer a victim frozen by circumstances beyond her control. She was a woman from the streets of Cali who had survived poverty, who had fought her way across an ocean to support her family, who would not die on this island. The bar counter stood 6 feet away in the main living area. Valentina moved without conscious thought, pure instinct driving her body. Her hand closed around the neck of a heavy bottle. Cognac or whiskey. The label meant nothing. The glass was thick, the liquid inside adding weight. Prince Khalid was turning toward her, perhaps preparing to reload his bow, perhaps simply to observe Isabella's suffering. He never completed the motion. Valentina threw with every ounce of strength her exhausted body could summon. The bottle rotated once in flight before the heavy base struck the prince's temple above his left eye. The sound was dull and wet, glass shattering, bone giving way. Prince Khalid made no sound at all. He simply dropped like a puppet with severed strings, the bow clattering away across the floor. He lay motionless, blood mixing with expensive cognac to pool beneath his head. Hassan stood paralyzed by the sudden violence, his face registering shock. The estate manager was not a fighter, that much was immediately clear. Valentina used his hesitation. She ran to Isabella, who was gasping in shallow breaths, her face grey with shock. The Brazilian woman weighed perhaps 115 pounds, but in her current state she was nearly dead weight. Valentina hooked her arms under Isabella's shoulders and dragged her backward. Hassan found his voice, shouting in Arabic, presumably calling for the guards. Valentina pulled harder, her feet slipping on Isabella's blood that now painted a wide trail across the white marble. She dragged her through the living area toward the glass doors she had spotted earlier, leading to the terrace and beach beyond. Every second expected guards to appear, weapons raised, ending this final desperate attempt at survival. The glass door was unlocked. Valentina kicked it open and hauled Isabella through onto wooden decking. The sky to the east showed the first hint of grey, false dawn beginning to dissolve the darkness. A pier extended 50 yards into the calm water, several vessels moored along its length. Valentina focused on the nearest, a sleek motorboat designed for sport fishing, perhaps 25 feet long, with a powerful outboard engine. Getting Isabella down the pier was torture. The Brazilian woman was fading in and out of consciousness, her body growing heavier with each yard. Valentina's arms screamed in protest, her lower back burning. Behind them, she heard shouts from the villa, male voices coordinating in Arabic. She did not look back, could not afford to look back. Only forward, to the boat, to the impossible hope it represented. She reached the boat's side and nearly sobbed. The gap between pier and deck was 3 feet, a simple step under normal circumstances, an impossible chasm now. She pushed Isabella toward the boat, letting her weight carry both of them forward. They tumbled into the vessel in a tangle, Isabella crying out as the arrow shaft was jarred. Valentina scrambled to the console, her mind racing. She had never operated a boat, never even been in one except for the fishing trawler that would eventually find them. The key was in the ignition. Perhaps the prince's arrogance had been that absolute, or perhaps it was standard practice on a private island. Valentina did not waste time questioning the fortune. She turned the key. The engine roared to life, the sound explosive in the pre-dawn quiet. Shouts from the pier, closer now. Valentina grabbed the throttle, pushing it forward. The boat lurched, still tied to the dock. She saw the ropes, thick and secured with complex knots she had no time to untie. A guard appeared at the end of the pier, weapon raised. Valentina jammed the throttle to maximum. The engine screamed, the boat straining against its moorings. The ropes groaned, fibers stretching. Then the cleat tore free from the dock with a crack of splintering wood. The boat shot forward, nearly throwing Valentina overboard. She grabbed the wheel, steering blindly away from the island into open water. Behind her, she heard the unmistakable sound of a second, larger engine starting. They were coming. The pursuit had begun. Isabella lay curled in the bottom of the boat, both hands still clutching her wounded thigh, blood pooling beneath her. Valentina steered with one hand and pressed her other against Isabella's wound, trying uselessly to slow the bleeding. The boat carved through calm water, heading toward nothing but open ocean and the slowly brightening eastern sky. The pursuit boat was faster, purpose-built for speed and interception. Valentina could hear it gaining despite her throttle being pushed to maximum. She had no idea how to navigate, no understanding of the control panel's various gauges and switches. She simply aimed the bow away from the island and held the wheel steady. The sky continued its gradual transition from black to deep blue, dawn approaching with agonizing slowness. Isabella's breathing had become shallow and rapid, textbook signs of shock. The arrow remained embedded in her thigh, the shaft moving slightly with each wave the boat crossed. Valentina knew enough emergency medicine to understand that removing the arrow would likely cause catastrophic bleeding. It had to stay in place until proper medical care arrived, if it ever arrived. She pressed her palm against the wound around the arrow's entry point, feeling hot blood pulse between her fingers. The pursuing boat was perhaps 200 yards behind now, close enough that Valentina could see 3 figures aboard. They were not firing weapons, not yet. Perhaps they wanted to take the women alive, return them to the island, finish what the prince had started. Or perhaps they simply wanted to avoid damaging their employer's expensive property. Either way, the gap was closing steadily. Valentina tried zigzagging, jerking the wheel left and right in desperate maneuvers that accomplished nothing except making Isabella moan in pain. The pursuit boat matched her movements easily, clearly operated by someone who actually knew how to handle a vessel. The sun's first direct rays broke the horizon, painting the water gold and pink. Beautiful, Valentina thought distantly, perhaps the last sunrise she would ever see. Then she spotted it, a dark shape on the horizon ahead, substantially larger than their small boats. At first she thought it might be a mirage born of exhaustion and dehydration, but as they drew closer, the shape solidified into reality. A commercial fishing trawler, riding low in the water, heading toward what Valentina assumed was the Qatari coast. The vessel looked old and weathered, probably Qatari or Iranian, hauling its overnight catch to morning markets. Valentina leaned on the boat's horn, a loud electronic blare that carried across the calm water. She held it down continuously, the sound desperate and unmistakable. Behind her, the pursuit boat suddenly slowed. The guards aboard were faced with a dilemma. Attacking or capturing the women in sight of witnesses would create complications. Even their employer's wealth might not easily resolve. The fishing trawler altered course, turning toward them. Valentina could see crew members gathering at the rail, pointing, clearly confused by the scene unfolding. A woman covered in blood, another woman wounded, a pursuit boat hanging back, all playing out in the morning sun 50 miles from shore. She reduced her throttle, letting the motorboat drift as the larger vessel approached. The trawler's captain, a weathered Qatari man in his 50s, shouted down in Arabic. Valentina responded in broken English, the only language she hoped might bridge the gap. "Help," she repeated. "Medical emergency, please help." The crew lowered a rope ladder. 2 men descended and carefully lifted Isabella aboard, while a third helped Valentina climb up. Her legs nearly gave out as she reached the deck, adrenaline finally depleting. The pursuit boat had retreated to a safe distance but remained visible, circling slowly. The trawler captain approached Valentina, his expression deeply troubled. He spoke some English, enough to ask basic questions. What happened? Where did they come from? Who was chasing them? Valentina's answer came out in a tumbling rush of English and Spanish. Private island, hunting, women killed, prince, arrow, escape. She was not making sense, she knew, but the physical evidence supported her fractured testimony. Isabella lay on the deck, crew members attempting to stem her bleeding with towels and a first aid kit designed for fishing injuries, not hunting arrows. The captain made a decision. He ordered his crew to full speed toward Doha and retrieved a radio handset. Valentina heard him speaking rapid Arabic, the word police repeated several times. He was reporting an emergency, requesting medical assistance and law enforcement at the port. The journey to Doha took nearly 2 hours. Valentina sat beside Isabella, holding her hand, speaking to her in Spanish, even though the Brazilian woman spoke Portuguese. The words did not matter, only the human connection, the promise that she was not alone. Isabella's eyes would open occasionally, unfocused and glassy, before closing again. Her skin had gone cold, despite the rising heat. As the Doha skyline appeared on the horizon, Isabella opened her eyes one final time. She looked directly at Valentina and spoke in clear Portuguese. Valentina did not understand the words, but the meaning was evident in Isabella's eyes. "Tell them, tell everyone, make them pay." Then her eyes closed and did not reopen. Valentina felt for a pulse in Isabella's wrist, found it weak and erratic, and watched it fade to nothing before they reached the port. The dock was already secured when they arrived, police vehicles with lights flashing, ambulances waiting, armed officers establishing a perimeter. The captain had apparently provided enough information for authorities to treat this as a major incident. Paramedics rushed aboard as soon as the trawler was secured. They worked on Isabella for several minutes before one of them looked at his colleague and shook his head. Valentina was lifted onto a stretcher, despite her protests that she could walk. Her body had other ideas, collapsing as soon as she tried to stand. Severe dehydration, the paramedic explained in English. Possible shock, definitely exhaustion. She was loaded into an ambulance, an IV inserted into her arm. As the doors closed, she caught a glimpse of the pursuit boat that had chased them. It had followed them into port and was now surrounded by police boats, its crew being detained. The hospital was clean and modern, everything white and chrome. Doctors examined Valentina thoroughly, asking questions she answered as coherently as her exhausted mind allowed. A police detective arrived, a woman in her 30s wearing plain clothes and a serious expression. She introduced herself as Detective Noor al-Kuwari and explained gently that Valentina needed to tell her everything that had happened, no matter how difficult. Valentina told her story from the beginning. The job offer, the helicopter, the island, the hunt, the deaths of Amara and Maria, Isabella's arrow wound, the bottle thrown at the prince's head, the escape by boat. Detective al-Kuwari listened without interruption, her expression carefully neutral. When Valentina finished, the detective asked one question. Can you identify the man who organized this? The prince. Valentina closed her eyes and saw his face, emotionless as he raised his bow. Yes, she said. I would recognize him anywhere. Detective Al-Kuwari's investigation moved with surprising speed. Within 4 hours of Valentina's testimony, a Coast Guard tactical unit was airborne, heading toward the coordinates the fishing trawler captain had logged. Valentina remained in the hospital under guard, officially for her protection, though the locked door suggested she was as much prisoner as witness. She was not allowed visitors, not permitted to contact her family in Colombia, and explicitly forbidden from speaking to media who had already begun gathering outside the hospital after word of the incident leaked. The tactical team's report arrived by secure transmission that evening. They had found Prince Khalid on the island, conscious but disoriented, with visible head trauma and a concussion consistent with blunt force impact. Hassan and 3 security guards were also detained. More significantly, following Valentina's detailed description of where she had heard the screams during the hunt, investigators located 2 shallow graves in the jungle, approximately half a mile from the villa. The bodies of Amara Omondi, 29, Kenyan national, and Maria Santos, 26, Filipino national, were recovered from the hastily dug graves. Forensic examination would later confirm that both women had died from multiple stab wounds inflicted by a large blade, consistent with a hunting knife. The wounds suggested close-quarters struggle rather than quick deaths. They had fought back, run, been caught, and been killed slowly. Additional evidence collected from the island included the compound bow, several arrows including one with blood matching Isabella's type, extensive blood trace evidence in the villa matching the pattern Valentina had described, and fragments of a broken cognac bottle. Security camera footage from the villa showed Valentina dragging Isabella through the living area, blood trail clearly visible, and the subsequent escape to the pier. What the cameras did not show was the hunt itself. The jungle had no surveillance. Prince Khalid bin Ahmed Al Thani was formally arrested and transported to a secure facility in Doha. The charges were severe: 3 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder, kidnapping, human trafficking, and several other related offenses. Bail was denied given the gravity of the crimes and the defendant's resources for flight. For approximately 72 hours, it appeared that justice might actually prevail. Then the machinery of wealth and influence began its work. A legal team materialized: 12 attorneys from 3 countries, specialists in criminal defense, international law, and crisis management. Their strategy became apparent within days. The deaths on the island, they argued, were tragic accidents that occurred during a consensual extreme adventure experience. All 4 women, they claimed, had signed extensive contracts acknowledging the risks of participating in a survival simulation game. The contracts were produced, documents in English bearing signatures that appeared genuine. The agreements described in clinical detail the nature of the experience, the use of non-lethal training weapons, the possibility of minor injuries, and the substantial financial reward for successful completion. The defense argued that the women had been lured by the $100,000 prize, had signed voluntarily, and had fully understood the risks involved. The murder weapon, the hunting knife allegedly used to kill Amara and Maria, was never recovered. The defense suggested it did not exist, that the women might have been injured accidentally during the simulation, and that inadequate medical response had led to their deaths. The bow that wounded Isabella was presented as having been loaded with a blunted training arrow, the kind used in role-playing scenarios. Isabella's fatal injury resulted from her falling onto the arrow shaft, driving it deeper, not from the initial impact. Valentina's testimony stood as the sole direct accusation against the prince, but she was an interested party, the defense argued, someone with motivation to fabricate a story that absolved her of any responsibility for the tragedy. They pointed out inconsistencies in her account, timeline discrepancies caused by her exhausted and traumatized state when first interviewed. They emphasized that she had admitted to striking Prince Khalid with a bottle, causing serious injury. Who, they asked, was really the violent party here? 5 days after his arrest, Prince Khalid was released on bail. The judge, Responding to defense arguments about lack of direct physical evidence linking the prince to the actual killings, agreed that pre-trial detention was no longer necessary. Hassan, the estate manager, was designated as the primary responsible party for inadequate safety measures during the event. He accepted this role, presumably in exchange for substantial compensation and protection for his family. Valentina learned of the release from Detective Al-Kuwari, who visited her hospital room with an expression of poorly concealed frustration. The detective explained the legal situation carefully. The case was not closed, charges remained active, but the path to conviction had become extremely difficult. Physical evidence was limited, witness testimony contradicted by produced contracts, forensic findings open to interpretation. It would proceed to trial, but the outcome was far from certain. 2 days later, Valentina received different visitors. 3 men in expensive suits who declined to provide names or organizational affiliation. They spoke in calm, reasonable tones about Valentina's difficult situation. She was in Qatar on a work visa that had been terminated following the incident. Technically, she was in the country illegally. She could face charges herself: assault against a member of the royal family, theft of a vessel, destruction of property. These charges could result in years of imprisonment. Alternatively, they offered a solution. Valentina would receive compensation of $450,000, enough to cover her brother's medical care for life, enough to ensure her mother never worked again. In exchange, she would sign a non-disclosure agreement, leave Qatar immediately, and return to Colombia. She would not speak to media, not participate in any trial proceedings, not cooperate with human rights organizations. Her silence was the price of the money and her freedom. The men did not explicitly threaten her family in Cali. They did not need to. The implication was clear in their careful words about how unfortunate it would be if her mother or brother experienced difficulties, how dangerous Colombia could be, how expensive ongoing medical care was. They gave her 12 hours to decide. Detective Al-Kuwari was not informed of this meeting. Officially, it never occurred. Valentina signed the papers the following morning. She had come to Qatar to save her family, and in the end, that remained her only priority. Justice for Amara, Maria, and Isabella would have to belong to someone else. She was placed on a private charter flight to Bogotá that afternoon, accompanied by an escort who ensured she departed without incident. The money appeared in an account established in her mother's name. The families of the 3 deceased women received similar offers through their respective recruitment agencies. Amara's family in Nairobi accepted $300,000. Maria's family in Manila received the same. The agencies facilitated the agreements, acting as intermediaries that ensured silence. The story of the hunt on Prince Khalid's Island never received significant international coverage. 6 months later, the case was quietly closed. Hassan pleaded guilty to criminal negligence resulting in death and received a 3-year suspended sentence. Prince Khalid faced no trial. The official conclusion described a tragic accident during an adventure tourism experience gone wrong due to inadequate safety protocols and supervision. Recommendations were made for improved regulation of such activities on private property. Valentina never returned to Qatar. She remained in Cali, using the money to establish a small business, a cafe in a neighborhood near where she grew up. Her brother's medication was secured, her mother retired, her sisters completed their educations. She did not speak publicly about what happened on the island, honoring the agreement that had purchased her family's security. But on certain mornings, standing in her cafe before dawn, watching the sky lighten over the mountains surrounding Cali, Valentina would remember those 12 hours. She would remember Amara's scream cutting through darkness, Maria's voice rising in terror, Isabella's final words in Portuguese that she never understood. She would remember the prince's emotionless face as he raised his bow, and she would remember the satisfying crack of glass against bone, the one moment when she had refused to remain prey. The arrow scar on Isabella's body, photographed during autopsy, remained in evidence files that would never be opened again. 3 women were dead. 1 had escaped. And somewhere on a private island in the Persian Gulf, a hunting bow hung on a wall like a trophy, waiting for the next time its owner decided to play his game.